I want you to stop for a moment and think about something. Think about the last time you genuinely felt in control of your own body. Not just comfortable, not just okay, but actually in control. Because if you are watching this, there is a good chance that somewhere along the way, that feeling disappeared. You started noticing it in small ways at first, the waistband sitting differently, the shirt that used to fit perfectly now pulling in ways you cannot explain. You cut back on dessert. You started walking more. Maybe you even tried one of those diets everyone seems to be talking about. And nothing happened. The belly stayed. If anything, it grew. And so did the quiet, exhausting feeling that no matter what you do, your body has simply decided not to cooperate. I hear this from people every single week. And every single time, I tell them the same thing I am going to tell you right now. What you are experiencing is not a failure of willpower, it is not laziness, and it is absolutely, completely, 100% not your fault. What it is biology. Specifically, the biology of what happens to the human body after the age of 60, and why the rules that once governed weight and fat and metabolism no longer apply the way they used to. My name is Dr. William Lee, and for over 2 decades I have studied how nutrition interacts with the body at the cellular and molecular level, specifically in the context of aging. And what I have found, what the research keeps confirming in study after study, is that visceral fat, the kind that accumulates deep inside the abdominal cavity and wraps around your vital organs, does not respond to conventional dieting the way most people believe it should. It is not a simple energy equation. It is not calories in versus calories out. After 60, visceral fat becomes something far more sophisticated and far more resistant. It becomes a biological system with its own survival strategy. But here is what the research also tells us, and what most people never get the chance to hear. Certain foods, ordinary, widely available, inexpensive foods, work directly against that survival strategy, not by starving your body, not by making eating a punishment, but by disrupting the specific hormonal and inflammatory signals that visceral fat depends on to grow, sustain itself, and resist breakdown. That is what I want to walk you through today. 9 specific foods, each one backed by peer-reviewed clinical research, each one working through a distinct biological mechanism, all of them designed by nature to do what decades of generic diet advice has failed to do. Before we get into it, if you are finding value in what I am sharing, please take 1 second and subscribe to this channel. Everything here is free. Every video is built around evidence-based guidance for people over 60 specifically, because this stage of life deserves real science, not recycled generic health tips. Hit subscribe, and while you are there, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you are watching from. I read every single one, whether you are in California or Cairo, in Manchester or Melbourne, in a small town or a crowded city. I want to know you are here. This community spans the globe, and every person in it matters. Now, let us talk about why visceral fat after 60 is so different from anything you have dealt with before, and why the old approaches keep failing. Visceral fat is not the layer of fat you can pinch at your waistline. That is subcutaneous fat, and while it is worth addressing, it is not the primary concern. Visceral fat lives deeper. It packs itself around your liver, your kidneys, your pancreas, your intestines. You cannot see it on the surface. You cannot feel it when you press on your stomach. And in many people, it accumulates to genuinely dangerous levels without ever producing the obvious outward appearance we typically associate with excess weight. This is what makes it so insidious and so frequently ignored until it is already doing significant damage. Because visceral fat is not passive, it does not simply sit there taking up space. It behaves like a metabolically active organ, one that works against you. It secretes inflammatory compounds around the clock. It releases hormones that interfere with insulin sensitivity. It drives up cortisol, the stress hormone already elevated in most adults over 60. And the more of it you carry, the more aggressively it defends its own existence, suppressing the very processes your body needs to break it down. There are 3 biological mechanisms that make visceral fat so stubborn at this stage of life. The first is hormonal. When estrogen and testosterone decline, as they do significantly after 60, the body begins preferentially storing fat in the abdominal region. This is an ancient biological response. Your body interprets hormonal decline as a signal of environmental stress and responds by centralizing energy reserves. It is trying to protect you. It does not understand that you have access to a grocery store. The second mechanism is chronic systemic inflammation. Visceral fat actively produces inflammatory cytokines, including interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha, and these compounds create an internal environment where fat cells become resistant to the signals that should be breaking them down. The inflammation also accelerates insulin resistance, which then drives further visceral fat accumulation. It is a loop, and it tightens over time. The third mechanism is the progressive loss of muscle mass that begins in your 50s and accelerates through your 60s. Less muscle means a slower resting metabolism, and a slower metabolism means your body burns fewer calories at rest, creating the conditions for visceral fat to accumulate even when your diet has not changed at all. Three mechanisms, each one reinforcing the other. But here is the thing about biology, it is not immovable. The right nutritional signals can interrupt each of these pathways, and that is exactly what the following 9 foods are documented to do. Food number 1, walnuts. Walnuts are among the most researched tree nuts in clinical nutrition, and the findings around visceral fat are striking. A study conducted at the University of California, San Diego, found that daily walnut consumption over 16 weeks produced a measurable reduction in visceral fat independent of caloric intake. The mechanism centers on the unique fatty acid profile of walnuts, which are rich in alpha-linolenic acid, a plant-based omega-3 that the body converts into the same anti-inflammatory compounds found in fatty fish. These compounds directly suppress the cytokine activity that visceral fat uses to protect itself. Beyond fatty acids, walnuts contain polyphenols that feed the beneficial bacteria in your gut, responsible for producing short-chain fatty acids, compounds that improve insulin sensitivity and reduce abdominal fat deposition at the hormonal level. 1 small handful per day is the threshold established in the research. Eat them as a snack, add them to oatmeal, or crush them into salads. The consistency matters more than the timing. Food number 2, turmeric. Turmeric has moved through health conversations for years, mostly as a trendy spice, and that framing has done it a disservice because the science behind its active compound, curcumin, is serious and specific. Curcumin has been shown in multiple randomized controlled trials to directly inhibit NF-κB, a master inflammatory signaling molecule that visceral fat relies on to sustain the chronic low-grade inflammation that locks it in place. A clinical trial published in the European Journal of Nutrition demonstrated that curcumin supplementation over 12 weeks produced significant reductions in visceral fat area in overweight adults compared to a placebo group. The absorption challenge with turmeric is real. Curcumin is poorly absorbed on its own, but pairing it with black pepper, which contains piperine, increases bioavailability by up to 2,000%. Half a teaspoon of turmeric with a pinch of black pepper in warm water, in soups, or in cooked vegetables every single day. That is the protocol. Simple, accessible, and biochemically documented. Food number 3, fermented foods, specifically yogurt, kefir, and kimchi. The connection between gut microbiome diversity and visceral fat is one of the most robust findings in recent nutritional research. People with lower diversity of beneficial gut bacteria consistently carry more visceral fat, entirely independent of how many calories they consume. This is not a theory. Multiple large-scale human studies have confirmed it. Fermented foods deliver live beneficial bacteria directly into the gut, restoring populations that are depleted by age, stress, medication use, and the kind of processed food exposure that accumulates over a lifetime. A clinical trial published in Cell found that a diet high in fermented foods produced a measurable increase in microbiome diversity and a corresponding reduction in inflammatory markers, including those directly associated with visceral fat accumulation over just 10 weeks. 1 serving per day, whether that is a cup of plain yogurt, a glass of kefir, or a portion of kimchi, is sufficient to begin shifting the internal environment. Food number 4, ginger. Ginger is one of the oldest therapeutic foods on Earth, and modern biochemistry is now mapping exactly how it works. The primary bioactive compounds in ginger, gingerols, and shogals have been shown to inhibit adipogenesis, the biological process by which new fat cells are created. They also reduce circulating cortisol levels, which is particularly significant for adults over 60, since elevated cortisol is one of the most direct hormonal drivers of abdominal fat storage. When cortisol stays persistently high, the body interprets the environment as dangerous and locks fat in the abdominal region as emergency fuel. Ginger works against that lock from two directions simultaneously, suppressing fat cell formation and reducing the stress hormone that signals the body to store fat centrally. A clinical review in the journal Obesity Reviews confirmed that ginger supplementation produced consistent reductions in waist circumference and body weight in human subjects across multiple studies. 2 grams per day is the documented effective dose. Steep it fresh in hot water, grate it into stir fries, or add it to smoothies. That is roughly a thumb-sized piece of fresh ginger daily. Food number 5, pomegranate. Pomegranate is one of the most polyphenol-dense foods available, and its effect on visceral fat operates through a mechanism that most people have never heard of. Pomegranate is extraordinarily rich in pinnacolagens and punic acid, compounds that are metabolized by gut bacteria into a molecule called urolithin A. Urolithin A has been shown in peer-reviewed research to activate mitochondrial renewal in cells, a process called mitophagy, which improves the metabolic efficiency of fat-burning pathways directly. Simultaneously, pomegranate polyphenols suppress aromatase activity, the same estrogen-converting enzyme that visceral fat uses to create a hormonal environment favorable to its own expansion. A study published in the Journal of Nutritional Biochemistry found that pomegranate extract supplementation significantly reduced visceral fat mass and improved insulin sensitivity in subjects over 8 weeks. Half a cup of pomegranate seeds daily, or 4 ounces of pure pomegranate juice with no added sugar, not the blended cocktails sold in most supermarkets. Pure unsweetened pomegranate juice or the whole fruit. Food number 6, flax seeds. Flax seeds address visceral fat through one of the most direct and least discussed pathways available in the food supply. They are the single richest dietary source of lignans, a class of phytoestrogens that bind to estrogen receptors in a way that moderates the estrogen excess driving visceral fat accumulation in both men and women over 60. When circulating estrogen levels climb too high, as they do through aromatization in visceral fat tissue, the body responds by storing more abdominal fat. Lignans from flax seeds interfere with that cycle at the receptor level, reducing the potency of excess estrogen without eliminating it entirely. Flax seeds are also rich in soluble fiber that feeds the beneficial gut bacteria responsible for reducing systemic inflammation, and in alpha-linolenic acid with the same visceral fat targeting properties noted in walnuts. 2 tablespoons of ground flaxseed per day. They must be ground, not whole, because the outer shell of a whole flaxseed passes through the digestive system largely undigested. Add them to oatmeal, to yogurt, to smoothies, or stir them into soup. 2 tablespoons every day. Food number 7, dark leafy greens, specifically spinach, arugula, and Swiss chard. These vegetables share a property that makes them uniquely effective against the hormonal dimension of visceral fat after 60. They are among the richest dietary sources of magnesium, a mineral that over 70% of adults are clinically deficient in by the time they reach 65. Magnesium deficiency has been directly linked in research to elevated cortisol, impaired insulin sensitivity, and increased visceral fat deposition. Restoring magnesium through food rather than supplementation provides a more sustained and bioavailable correction. Beyond magnesium, leafy greens are rich in nitrates that the body converts to nitric oxide, a compound that improves blood flow to adipose tissue and enhances the delivery of fat-burning signals to visceral fat cells. A study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that higher dietary magnesium intake was independently associated with lower visceral fat area in adults over 55, even after controlling for total caloric intake, 2 cups per day, raw or lightly cooked. Cooking actually concentrates the magnesium per serving, so a cup of cooked spinach delivers more than a cup of raw. Food number 8, green tea. What most people understand about green tea barely scratches the surface of what the clinical literature has documented. Green tea contains a catechin called EGCG, epigallocatechin gallate, that has been studied more extensively for its effects on visceral fat reduction than almost any other naturally occurring compound. The mechanism is specific. EGCG activates an enzyme called AMPK, adenosine monophosphate activated protein kinase, which functions as a master metabolic switch inside your cells. When AMPK is activated, your cells shift out of fat storage mode and into fat oxidation mode, and EGCG drives this process with particular specificity in visceral adipose tissue. A randomized controlled trial published in Obesity found that daily green tea consumption over 12 weeks produced significant reductions in visceral fat area compared to a water-only control group with no other dietary changes. 3 cups per day, brewed from loose leaf or quality bagged tea, consumed without sweetener. Added sugar blunts the catechin activity and partially reverses the metabolic benefit. 3 cups, no sweetener, 30 days minimum. Food number 9, extra virgin olive oil. If every other food on this list attacks visceral fat from a different biological angle, extra virgin olive oil is the one that reinforces all of them simultaneously. Its primary anti-inflammatory compound, oleocanthal, inhibits the same enzymatic pathway targeted by ibuprofen, producing a sustained reduction in the systemic inflammation that visceral fat depends on for its own survival. Unlike long-term anti-inflammatory medication, oleocanthal accomplishes this without the gastrointestinal and cardiovascular risks that make those drugs problematic for adults over 60 already managing multiple conditions. The PREDIMED trial, one of the most comprehensive nutrition studies in history involving nearly 7,500 participants, found that consistent extra virgin olive oil consumption produced measurably lower visceral fat levels and significantly fewer cardiovascular events compared to low-fat dietary controls. 2 tablespoons per day over salads or drizzled over cooked vegetables. The distinction between extra virgin and regular olive oil is not marketing. Refining strips the polyphenols and oleocanthal that make it work. Only extra virgin delivers what the research has documented. 9 foods: walnuts, turmeric, fermented foods, ginger, pomegranate, flaxseed, dark leafy greens, green tea, extra virgin olive oil. Each one addresses a different mechanism. Together, they create a nutritional environment where visceral fat loses the hormonal and inflammatory support it needs to grow and protect itself, where your cells begin shifting from storage to burning, and where the biology that has been working against you starts working with you instead. This is not a deprivation protocol. You do not need to overhaul everything at once. Here is your starting point. Choose 3 of these 9 foods. Commit to eating them every day for the next 30 days. 3 foods, that is it. Pay attention to how your energy responds in the second week. Notice your sleep. Notice how your midsection begins to feel different even before you can see the difference. Then come back to this channel and tell me what happened. I read every comment personally, and the stories that come in from this community are part of what drives me to keep making these videos. Every kind's wow. If this helped you today, share it with someone in your life who needs it. A partner, a sibling, a friend. The people you care about over 60 deserve this information, and most of them will never get it from a 10-minute clinical appointment. That is why this channel exists. Subscribe to Wellness Daily if you have not already. It takes 1 second and it costs nothing. Every week I will be here with more evidence-based, science-grounded guidance built specifically for this stage of life, because your health at 60 and beyond is not a consolation prize. It is worth fighting for. And I promise you, you are not too late to change the direction of it.